Shalom Aleichem. Good evening to all. This is odd to have an electronic Farbrengen. And I'm going to say L'chaim, even though I find this strange. I'm talking to you, and you're listening to me. So we're here together, in spite of the fact that physically I'm alone in a room, more or less. So Shalom Aleichem to everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming and joining. L'chaim. Chaim lebracha. Chaim tev v'shalom. I had a seltzer, so I'm good with the bracha. L'chaim. L'chaim. You just watched the Sikha that the Rebbe spoke 33 years ago tonight. 33 years ago tonight. When you look at that Sikha in hindsight, I think it's accurate to say that it put Chabad into a state of trauma, which a good argument could be made we have yet to recover from. The Rebbe gave us a shake that in the world of the Rebbe, who was in the habit of giving people shakes, this was a whole nother level. We were unprepared for it. We had a very difficult time managing it. And a lot of people would say we still haven't figured out what the Rebbe wants. What was the point of it? It was literally 200 seconds, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, where the Rebbe just showed an enormous amount of pain about Mashiach. And that was it. It was exactly 11 months to the day till the stroke, and I think that's significant also, where the entire diet of Lubavitch, the entire diet of the Rebbe, everything was Mashiach, as the Rebbe used to say, Peschem Edovish Azman Groma, Bias Mashiach Sidkenu, taken from a Yad Mamish. The Rebbe would start sichas like that. The entire focus of the Rebbe from that point forward was about Mashiach. But it was very positive, very positive. And as time went on, it became more and more positive. So there was these 200 seconds. There was a wake-up call of extraordinary power. And everybody had to try and figure out what the Rebbe wants. What does it mean? And there are all kinds of different insights. I want to tell you what I think. I've said this before, but I want to repeat this here. It's just another way of looking at that 200 seconds. Most people feel like those 200 seconds, that certainly the tone was a tone of resignation. The tone was a tone of despair, yiyush. But perhaps there's another way to look at those 200 seconds. Perhaps those 200 seconds was the Rebbe taking off his mask. We know by Rabbeim, Chal Tzadikim, but Rabbeim particularly, that what they're really thinking and feeling, we don't know. Everything is tempered. There's a very careful managing of what they show us. I saw a quote from the Chassid Rabbi Nanis. It's so interesting. Rabbi Nanis describes his yechidus with the Rebbe in 1966, when the Rebbe wanted him to live in Yerushalayim and he wanted to live by the Rebbe in New York. And he told the Rebbe that he's elderly and that he suffered a lot and he wants to spend his last years in the Rebbe's Dalaramas. Now he would live more than 30 years after that yechidus, but there was no way for him to know that. And the Rebbe said the soldier goes where the commander tells him and not where he wishes to go. And he uses a very interesting expression. He says, Ich hab keinmal nicht gehört, a Rebbe red mit azat Tekef, sind ich hab gehört die Farbrengens von Rayatz, Bechayev von Rashab. Which means in English, I hadn't heard a Rebbe speak with such force since I heard the previous Rebbe Farbrengn when his father was still the Rebbe. There's a meaning, there's a connotation in those words. That he was a Bocher and Temchet Mimim, he was at the Farbrengens of the Frierdiker Rebbe when he wasn't a Rebbe. And those Farbrengens were fire. They were intense. When he became a Rebbe, the Farbrengens were more modulated. They were more controlled. Because the power of the words of a Rebbe are so extraordinary. A Rebbe has to be very particular, careful. Like the Rebbe used to say, Simchas Torah shat nicht. But the other 364 days, Dafn Zachiten. Words, if the Rebbe has to be very careful with his words. What we experienced, Chav Chas Nissen, was a power that was extraordinary. And one way to explain it is that Rebbe showed us how he feels. Not about his frustration, not about his despair, but his desire for Mashiach. Perhaps another way of interpreting those 200 seconds was that Rebbe literally just showing us, demonstrating what it means to want Mashiach, how desperate it is, how serious it is, how practically necessary it is. And instead of seeing it as this pain and this despair, it was a gilui. The Rebbe showed us what he felt. And then he stopped showing us what he felt. And he expects us to acquire that kind of want, to acquire that kind of desire, to acquire that kind of urgency. And this is on everybody's mind. This is our business. Our business is the Rebbe, our business is Hasidus, our business is Afat Samayonos, our business is Afat Sayados, and our business is Mashiach. So let's talk a little bit about this. Let's talk about this from a variety of different angles. The first is the Simanim Mashiach, something which the Rebbe spoke about often. The idea that the indicators, the signs that Mashiach is coming. Or to say it in perhaps more skeptical words, there is an argument to be made. People have made the argument that so many years have passed that Chas v'Sholem, it may have, the Rebbe was trying. I don't believe that for 1 second. But it's because the Rebbe didn't just say he's bringing Mashiach. The Rebbe proved in a variety of different ways that the world is holding at the threshold of Mashiach. He gave many simanim. I remember a siche, the Shabbos Pashas Tel Des Tov Shin Nun, where the Rebbe asked a question. The people are saying, why am I talking so much about Mashiach and speaking about the imminence of the coming of Mashiach? Where do you see changes in the world? And the Rebbe spoke of simanim, indicators, signs that we're holding by the imminence of the coming of Mashiach. And the first, of course, is the Mishnah at the end of Masechta Saita, that begins with the words Be'ikve Mashiach. At the end of the Golus, there are going to be certain conditions in the world that reflect the imminence of the coming of Mashiach, which has to do with disrespect, a breakdown of order, where people prioritize entertainment to meaningful living, to real, deep, and significant phenomena in all kinds of ways. The Mishnah even talks about inflation and a variety of different indicators which are so ripe. And the Rebbe spoke about this decades ago, that if you look at the world today, you see the simonim that the Mishnah describes in the Masechta Seita being actualized in front of our eyes. And perhaps one that I should press on just for a moment is the preoccupation with pleasure and entertainment. You know, we live in a rich society. As much as we cry poverty, we live in a rich society. We call ourselves consumers. That means we take more than we provide. We take in more than we create. But we've become a civilization, the West, America in particular, that people live for entertainment. People live for vacation. People live for retirement. People live for laughing, for eating good food and drinking good wine. And they define themselves by those phenomena of entertainment. In other words, if a person has a life that's meaningful and purposeful and they entertain themselves for the purposes of relaxation, that's one thing. But when a person defines him or herself by their entertainment, this is what I live for, this is what I aspire to, that's what the Mishnah is describing at the end of Masechta Seita as a siman of Mashiach. And that siman has, in the last 30 years, become far more acute, and in no way has it become diminished. So this is number one. This is the first aspect that Rabbi spoke about the Mishnah many, many times. Number two. Now, number two, I know is controversial, but the Rebbe said it. And if the Rebbe said it, it's true. And what I mean when I say if the Rebbe said it, it's true, I mean that it's real, even if it doesn't seem that way to us. We just, unfortunately, need to wait a little bit. It would happen to be the Shabbos of my Chasanet. That's why it's so important to me. I got married that Monday. Shabbos Parshas told us Tov Shin Nun. It's in the Mugad Kasicha. But I remember the Rebbe saying it. It's published in the Sefer Hasichas. But I remember the Rebbe speaking. The Rebbe asked the question. People are saying that I'm talking so much about Mashiach, And what is it in the world that indicates that there's any kind of real change to suggest that we're holding in the imminence of the coming of Mashiach? And the Rebbe said something unbelievably positive. The Rebbe said, Mizet in a halbe Welt, that's where the Rebbe phrased it, in half the world. Now, this is only 30 years ago, but the population then was between 4 and 5 billion people. And he mentioned by name Russia, which he called Medina Seinu, China, he said it in English, China, and Hoidu, and I think he said India also in English. Then all of three of these countries, the Rebbe said in population, they're half the world. Between Russia, the Soviet Union, and the Republic of China and India, you have, at that time, half the world's population. I think it's still true. And the Rebbe said in each of these three countries, we see change, we see movement, revolution. And they're all in the direction of tzedek v'yosher. In the direction, in Hebrew, the Rebbe said tzedek v'yosher, which means righteousness or justice and fairness. In English, the Rebbe would say goodness and kindness. I presume it's approximately the same idea. And the Rebbe said these changes are an indication of the imminence of the coming of Mashiach. But you see, here it's a positive siman. The first sign, the sign of the Masechta, the Mishnah Masechta Soita, the Chazal, the Braisa on that, is not so gewaldic. It's pointing out a breakdown of civilization, a breakdown of respect, a breakdown of order as a sign of the imminence of the coming of Mashiach. But this is actually very positive. When you see the world struggling towards becoming righteous, people becoming good. One of the highlights of those 11 months between when the Rebbe first spoke about Mashiach, Chav Zayin, the Rebbe called it Chav Zayin, by the way, not Chav Ches. Chav Zayin is Chav Ches is, and then of course 11 months later, Chav Zayin Adarishan, the following year, Tafshin and Beis, was the Siach of Mishpatim, which is 1 month to the day prior to the stroke, where the President of the United States and the Soviet Union and the President of the Federation of Russia met in New York to discuss disarmament. And the Rebbe spoke a whole Farbrengen about that event, and he said it's Mupu Loisav Shal Melech HaMashiach, Basma Mashiach himself is doing this, that this direction in the world towards disarmament is a sign of the imminence of the coming of Mashiach. And he explained, the whole classic idea. The idea that Hasidus talks about often and the Rebbe pressed on a lot. That one of the most important ideas that you need to understand in Torah is that the most basic ideas of morality, even lo tirtzach, even do not murder, cannot stand on their own feet. In other words, human beings all know they shouldn't kill. But what's going to stop them from actually killing? And the answer is not going to come, not their consciousness and not their philosophy and not what they call social order, social norms. The answer is misinai. Because Hashem said, because God said you're not allowed to kill. And the Rebbe said there have been, so many people have known for so long that murder is a bad idea, and yet the history of the world is replete with war. And the Rebbe said the idea that people get together to take actionable, practical steps to diminish weapons of war and to replace them with weapons of agriculture and so on and so forth is not simply because of mutually assured destruction, because the world has become so dangerous. It's because there's something changing in the world that's awakening in people. A principle of morality that comes from God. It doesn't come from their own mind. It doesn't come from their own decision-making. It comes from the Eibush. It's a siman of the coming of Mashiach. So the Rebbe spoke about Russia and about China and about India and said in these three countries there are positive changes in the direction of tzedek v'yosher and righteousness and fairness, or goodness and kindness, which the Rebbe said is a siman of Mashiach. Now it's 34 years since that sikha, and you can scratch your head and say, whoa, I don't see it. And I can say two things to that. First of all, if we don't see it, doesn't mean that it's not happening. And the second thing I would say is if we would be objective about what's going on in the world, rather than react to the way news is reported and news is interpreted, we may actually realize that the world is in a far better situation than we're led to believe, because people are trying to create crises and fear in the world so that you should continue listening to them. In other words, when you follow the world, especially what's happened in the last 6 months, you certainly get the impression that the world's a terrible place. It's going from bad to worse and all the other things. It's not only the facts that are being reported, but the tone and the spirit and the direction that the person reporting that news is providing you. If you can separate yourself from that, you may actually see that the world is a far better place than people would like you to believe, and it's a far better place than it's perhaps ever been. And so those are two different points that I'm making. Number one, unfortunately, there's Lamacher. If the Rebbe said there's change in China and in India, there's change in China and India in a positive direction. Change in the Soviet Union, we witnessed. It was one of the greatest miracles in the history of the world. The Soviet Union went away, just disappeared. And there was no loss of life. There was no crises. In spite of what's happening now, compared to what it could have been, it's small fry. And we witnessed it. The collapse of the Soviet Union is arguably one of the greatest miracles in the history of mankind. And nobody stopped to notice because it happened so peaceably, it happened so quietly that you didn't even see it happening, which only enhances the miracle. This is another area that the Rebbe spoke to as simonim, as indicators of the imminence of the coming of Mashiach. And number three, this is personally very important to me. And again, the reason it's important to me is because I believe that so many people miss this, not because they're not experiencing it, but because we're so distracted by the way people tell us to think. And so many people have a habit of telling us to look at the world through negative eyes. And the Rebbe is a realist. And the Rebbe spoke to the challenges of the world and the halamas vestadim of Golos and the achshel darbet miyah very, very candidly. But the Rebbe also was very positive. He wasn't only positive in how he expected the future to be, he was positive in how he defined the world. So there's an idea which the Rebbe spoke to many times, which we're all experiencing in our daily lives, but it's convoluted, it's fogged, it's complicated. And I can see that it's complicated, but it's not untrue, it's just complicated. And if you can hear me out and look at it from a different angle, maybe you can come to see what it is that I'm saying. And that is that Rebbe discussed the pasuk in Parshas Boy, that the Yidden, while we're still in Mitzrayim, at the moments prior to the Yitzias Mitzrayim, to the Exodus, and the Jewish people had light in their homes, meaning the Jewish people had been slaves for so long, like the Rebbe used to quote the Chazal, that the Pascha, Aveda, Me'aveseinu, Mitzrayim, Me'reish Hashana, they went out of Mitzrayim on Pesach, which is in the spring. From the fall, there was no longer Avdas. They were free. They're living in Egypt, and they were free, and they were living quite well. They were living comfortably. And the Rebbe quoted that pasuk, and he made the argument, and he said in Yiddish with such intonation, with such trop, with such emphasis, with so much hearts. In the letzte Tag under the Goyim from Golos, he would say it over and over and over again. And the right language is he's saying it over and over and over again. In the last days and instances of the Golos, Yidden sit in Golos, and there's lichtigkeit, there's light. The world in which we live today, as it relates to Jewish people in particular, and again, I know that this is a very hard moment to make such a statement because of what's going on in Eretz Yisrael and what's going on in Eastern Europe, but it's still true. It's still actually true. Jewish people are living comfortably and safely and freely. We're able to practice Torah and mitzvahs any place in the world. And like the Rebbe used to say, the Rebbe says, it's not only the government doesn't interfere, they support and they assist, they help you to practice Torah and mitzvahs. This is a truth that gets lost in our fear, it gets lost in our uncertainty, it gets lost in our worry. But it's a truth, and it's a siman of Mashiach. One of the simanim of Mashiach is the comfort and the wealth and the security and the freedom that the Jewish people experience in the last days and moments of the Golus, which we are living. And it's a sign that Otot kum Mashiach. In other words, it's a sign that the Rebbe wasn't hoping to bring Mashiach and Chas v'Sholom. He missed an opportunity, as some think. I'm not going to say they say it because no one is Beseach Peh. He was showing us in the world, Simonim, that this is it. This is the end of the train. This is the end of the ride. Oh, we're holding by Mashiach now. And finally, the last thought is the miracles. The miracles. Rabbi Yossi, I'm a teacher, and I teach children who were born after all these things happened. But some of you are listening to me are old enough to remember these events. In Tafshin Nun Aleph in 1990 and 91, there was the goal. It was 91, I think. It was the Gulf War. And Saddam Hussein threatened to attack Israel, and he sent Scuds. He sent 38 Scuds. And there was very little or no loss of life. And we all talked about the big miracle, 38 Scuds hit Eretz Yisrael. It's a nes she'en kamayu. You know why the nes was so big? Because the Rebbe predicted it, and he pointed it out. The Rebbe said over and over again, as we all know, we've seen the videos, the safest place in the world is Eretz Yisrael. Eretz asher ein yad Hashem elokecha ba mereishis hashana v'ad achri shana. Le'yonim v'le'yishin shema Yisrael. They wish to watch over the Jewish people b'chalal. They wish to love the Jewish people, and he watches over the Jewish people, and in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz HaKadosh in particular. And it was such a big ness. 38 Scuds hit Eretz Yisrael, and they were all rickety bombs. If you think about what's happened just in the last couple of weeks, and what's happened periodically over the last many, many years, where they sent rockets and all kinds of military satellites from near and from far in the hundreds and in the thousands. Iran sent in one day, 300 missiles. Some of them were considerable, and they were modern, and there's no loss of life. And the fact that nobody says, what a ness, is only for one reason. Because it's Gimel Tammuz. Because there's nobody pointing to the miracles, pointing out the Nisim and the flies. If 38 Scuds was a miracle, I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, there was in the summertime, they sent from Gaza, which is next door, it's not a couple hundred miles away, 4,000 rockets, and there was no loss of life. 4,000 rockets. In other words, 100 times as many as the miracle of the Scuds that happened 30 years earlier, which the Rebbe celebrated, and nobody even noticed. Because kenet ntangeviz mit finger, nobody pointed out the miracle. The miracles that are happening for the Jewish people, especially at Yisrael, are astounding. Astounding. And maybe she should help, and maybe should give koyach and wisdom and neshama to our leaders to finish. We'll finish one time. We'll never have to fight again. Hashem should help us, that we should have seichel to understand that our role is to finish. And if we'll finish, we'll never have to fight again. The Eibush is performing nisim v'neflois, unbelievable miracles. We just don't see him. Why? It's the haze of war. It's the haze of worry. It's the haze of negativity. It's the haze of fear that either we bring upon ourselves or others bring it upon us, or that combination. But if you'll be objective, the 4 points that I just listed, which are all the Rebbe's ideas, I'm simply repeating Divrei Arav about the Simanim HaMashiach, which we all see. Maybe we could put on a different set of spectacles, and perhaps a more objective, a more honest set of spectacles, and see that the things that Rebbe spoke 30 years ago were not 30 years ago. They're more now than then, on a much bigger scale, in a much greater way, in a much deeper way, and to appreciate that the nevuah of the Rebbe, that Hini Zeh Melech HaMashiach Ba, is exactly that. This is the end of the ride. We're holding Od BaMashiach Tzidkenu. And the thoughts to the contrary are Poshet Yetzer Hara. Their sadness, their weakness, their fear, they're what people call realism. And realism isn't necessarily true. It's just human nature to be disposed towards negativity, towards fear. So that's number one, the simonim of the coming of Mashiach. Number two, the Rebbe spoke about bringing Mashiach, right? In the Kinus HaShluchim in Tafshin and Beis, Pashas Chayisara, they went over to the Rebbe, the leaders of the Shluchim, Rabbi Shem Tev and Rabbi Krinsky, I'm sure there were others, but I don't remember. And the Rebbe said loud, Kabbalas Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Poel Mamish. Our role is to receive and greet Mashiach Tzidkenu. Now, over the years, the Rebbe gave four. The Rebbe personally gave four actionable things that we could do, practical, actionable things that we could do to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. Number one, to daven for Mashiach, to be mafzeh for Mashiach, the Rebbe spoke that it says in Mefarshim at the end of the Nil, he mentioned the Radak and other Mefarshim, who say they bring rayas from the Psukim. The Mashiach is not going to come until we demand. The Mashiach is not going to come until we insist that he comes. And if you remember, the Rebbe made a chain. The Rebbe had the idea of a chain letter. It was an interesting story that the Rebbe said, I got a letter from a woman who was frightened by one of these chain letters, where you have to send a dollar to a person or else who knows what's going to happen to you. And she was frightened by the threats in this page. And she sent a letter to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe what she should do, and the Rebbe told her to throw it in the garbage. And then the Rebbe said, I asked myself, why did this come to my attention? And the Rebbe said, I have to learn a lesson in Avodas Hashem. And the Rebbe said that the lesson I learned from myself is that you have to make a chain letter of Kedusha, no threats, but just ask people that each one should send a letter to 10 people. And the content of that chain letter was to announce to the world that one of the conditions for Mashiach's coming is demanding him. Davening and demanding Mashiach. It says in Hilchos Sfarim that Mashiach doesn't come until we ask for him and insist that we need him. And this is as theoretical as this is, as spiritual as this is actionable. It says Negeya, as uns Negeya, a Mashiach will come. It's important that it should matter to us that Mashiach should come. Our desire for Mashiach and our being mispala for Mashiach brings Mashiach. And those are two different things. You have to desire Mashiach and you have to daven for Mashiach. And you can't daven for Mashiach if Mashiach's not that important on your list of important things. So that becomes a challenge on each one of us, that Mashiach should matter to us. The Rebbe said to somebody once at a Farbrengn, she was listening at the house, and the Rebbe was eating his heart out about Mashiach, and the Rebbe said to this fellow that he was sitting with, the mein man meint as Aleph will Mashiach, as Eifel as the Rebbe, my husband thinks everybody wants Mashiach as much as he does. The Rebbe wants us to want Mashiach as much as he does. And incidentally, as I said earlier, that's one of the explanations for what we saw on Chav Zayin, Chav Ches Nisan 33 years ago. He showed us how it looks, how it feels, that there should be in our heart a need for Mashiach, a desire for Mashiach, and not only because of tzodes, but because Ben Shegolim al Shulchan Aviv, like the Rebbe says in the end of the Ma'avata Tetzaveh, Kosis Lamoir, Gila Lakus Negei Letzim, it's a Yossi, from the fact that the Eibush is not revealed in the world, it's Kosis Lamoir. A Jew has to desire Mashiach and daven for Mashiach. It's an actionable thing. And the Rebbe made a campaign to tell this to people. Tell people that bringing Mashiach depends on us asking for him. This is number one. It's a campaign that the Rebbe made, number one. Number two, the Sikh of Purim, Tafshin Mem Zayin, which I'm sure you all know, it's the official pitch for the Mashiach campaign, although the Rebbe started talking about Mashiach the day he became Rebbe, and throughout his Nesias, but especially in the early Mems, he began to talk about Mashiach much, much more repeatedly and emphatically and emotionally and personally. Nevertheless, the Farbrengen, where the Rebbe pitched Mashiach as a mitzvah with Purim Tavshin Mem Zayin, he spoke like 100 minutes, long sichas. And I'm sure you know that those 100 minutes entailed the 200 seconds that he would speak 3.5 years later, Chav Zayin, Chav Ches Nisan, Tavshin and Aleph, 3 years later, 4 years later. It's mamish the same teichen. What the Rebbe said in 200 seconds with so much emotion that he shook us out of our complacency, he rattled us out of our dreamlike state. He said 4 years before exactly the same words. Just like in Chav Ches Nisan Tov Shin Nun Aleph, the Rebbe said, Ich hab getan alles, was ich kann. And I'm not going to say the next words. Ich gebe es über jede eine von euch. I did everything I could, and then there's that. I'm giving it over to you. Well, in Purim Mem Zayin, he said the same thing. But he didn't scream. And he explained it logically. He used the expression, Geit es hariber von der Hanassi zu der Hakoil. Those are his own words. It goes over from the Nasi, as the Nasi's role to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, and it becomes the role of everybody else. And if you look at the Sikha carefully, you listen to the video, watch the video, listen to the tape, and read the text, the Rebbe indicated that part of why that happens is because there's a need for more iskashros. So the Rebbe spoke in that Farbrengen Purim, the same thing he spoke in those 200 seconds. I wasn't in New York, and I didn't even see that Farbrengen because I was busy in Miftzayim. I was on Shlichus at the time. And I asked people, how did Rebbe get away with it? The Rebbe said this. The Rebbe spoke Purim by Farbrengen that it goes over from the Rebbe to Chassidim and Shah still. It's very powerful. Anyway, but in that 100 minutes, let's say, it's one long sikha and then several shorter sikhas. The Rebbe said many, many things. And one of the things that the Rebbe spoke about, and again, this is halacha l'maaseh, although, again, you could say that it's ephemeral. It's not ephemeral because it's ephemeral because it's difficult. But the Rebbe said, the way to bring Mashiach is to fulfill the Rambam and Hilchas Tshuva. La'olam yira adam atzmei shakel. It's a Gemara, and it's a Rambam. Yira adam atzmei shakel, v'chol ha'olam kulei shakel, osa maisa achas, diber achas, machshav achas, echriyas atzmei, v'kol ha'olam kulei kaf zchus, maybe le'lehem v'yishuv atzala. That, the Gemara says, the Rambam paskins, a person, the way that Rambam speaks, if you remember the Pedic, whatever it is, Gimel of Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam discusses judgment and reward and punishment. And he speaks about a Beinyani and a Tzaddik and a Rasha. Of course, it's not the Beinyani and the Tzaddik and the Rasha of Tanya, it's the Beinyani of Shem HaMushal, of Schar v'Oinish, 50-50, more than 50-50, less than 50-50. So the Rambam says a person has to always look at himself and at his community and at his country and as the whole world as shakel. It's exactly 50-50. And one action tips the scale. This is a practical instruction from the Rebbe based on Halacha and Rambam, which empowers every individual to personally bring Mashiach. That's the Rebbe's point. Mashiach is cosmic. Mashiach is very big. And there are practical sides to Mashiach. There are very practical sides to Mashiach, which I hope to touch on soon. But Mashiach is also up to God. Right? Mashiach doesn't come because we fix the social order. Mashiach comes because the Eibishter helps us fix the social order. Mashiach comes because whatever we need to do to create the space where the Gili Elokus, which is going to manifest the personality of Mashiach, the Gili of Mashiach, and change the whole world, not just the Jewish world, but the whole world, is an inyan ruchni. It's a spiritual thing. And every individual at every moment can say, I can be this person if I will live my life on this level. Of course, the frustration is I did it once, and Mashiach didn't come. I did it twice, and Mashiach didn't come. How many times they got to do it? And the answer is until Mashiach comes. But this is a hirah that the Rebbe gave in talking about Mashiach, in talking about the obligation, the personal obligation. Again, to quote the Rebbe's words from that Farbrengen, Geitas ariber funde hanasi to them hakoil goes over from the Rebbe, the Nasi Ador, to the hakoil, to the community, that it becomes our obligation. And the Rebbe said the practical lesson, lemaise, is a person every minute of his life should say, if I do a good deed today, I could bring Mashiach. And chas v'shalom, the opposite. It's number two. It's the second practical lesson. And number three, this was Pashas Kiseitze Tov Shin Mem Ches, where the Rebbe spoke about Simcha. The Rebbe spoke about Simcha. And you know that the Rebbe introduces a dimension of Simcha which you do not have in Rambam, right? The Rebbe says that this Simcha you have in the Rambam, but you don't have it in Rambam, right? The Rambam says the greatest Simcha that could be is Simcha Shal Mitzvah. And the place where the Rambam discusses Simcha is in Hilchos Shevet Sukkah V'Lulav, which is connected to mitzvahs. The Ramah has Simcha in the end of it, Chaim Teiv Leiv Mishta Tomid. Tomid. And the Rebbe used the expression Simcha B'Taharasa. Joy for no particular reason, just because I'm a Yid, just because I live in Eibishter's world. Simcha not in conjunction with a mitzvah, not in conjunction with Limud HaTeirah, not in conjunction with Avedas HaTfilah, like the Chazal say, weißt du. In Eidim L'Spala, Mitech Simcha. Mitzvahs have to be done by Simcha. Teirah has to be learned by Simcha, like the Maimonim bring. But Simcha, a Yid has to be Freilich all the time. And the Rebbe actually said in that Farbrengn that he dares us to try. He dares us to try to live our lives with Simcha. In other words, he said, if we'll try it, we'll see that it'll work. Pasha, to be Freilich Yidden, happy Jews that will live in Hashem's world. There's a video of a man who came to the Rebbe by dollars. And he must have been kind of upset about his life. And he was a Chassidish Yid. We had the Levush. And he said to the Rebbe very earnestly that he heard that the Rebbe talks about Simcha a lot, and the Rebbe confirmed it. And he said, Fin vus, what should I be so happy about? And the Rebbe said, Was heist bist a Chayid. What do you mean, why? Because you're a Jew. That's enough of a reason. And you see, the thing about Simcha is that as mature adults, we think of it as a game for little kids. Who's happy? Naive people. If you're intelligent and you're grown and you read the newspaper every day, as Rebbe talked about so often, so you're much more realistic. When you're realistic, you have a much more realistic sense of the world, and you have to solve all the world's problems, so you're busy worrying about solving the world's problems, so Mamela, you don't have the time and space to be besimcha. Nobody had to solve the world's problems more than the Rebbe, and nobody was more besimcha than the Rebbe himself. Why? Because it's Avodas Hashem. There is nothing naive and childish about being happy. It's courageous and difficult. Just like positivity is hard. Everybody knows it. To be sad and worried and afraid and negative is basic to the human condition. If children are not intelligent enough to know that, right? Adults are disposed towards that, towards fear, towards uncertainty, towards worry, what they call realism. It's not good. It's not only not good religiously, it's not good psychologically, and everybody knows it. And everybody knows and appreciates and understands that if they could find the strength to be positive, it's not going to change the world, but it'll change them. And in changing them, they're putting themselves in a position where they consequently can change the world. So there's nothing childish about simcha. It's a deep and difficult task. And the Rebbe said, if you and I can find it within ourselves to be besimcha, it'll bring Mashiach. He said, I dare you, try it. The Rebbe brought in that sicha that there were other Gedolei Yisrael who tried to bring Mashiach. The Rebbe mentioned the Beis of Dilarainu and the Chayzim Lublin. In the sichas, in the footnotes, you can see the sicha. I wasn't here at the time, but I heard Chazar after Shabbos, and I also read the Hanocha, the sicha, which is Muga. And the Rebbe said, Simcha will bring Mashiach. Simcha is a real thing. And it's a difficult thing. And it's not childish and trivial, it's deep and it's avoida. It's avoida. And the Rebbe said it's a practical, actionable message for each one of us that we could do in hastening the coming of Mashiach. Okay, that's number 3. And then, of course, number 4 is what happened consequent to the Sicha of Chav Zayin Chav Ches Nissen, which was on a Thursday night. That Shabbos was Shmini. The following Shabbos was Tazriya Mitzvah, and that was really when the Rebbe set the pitch for the Mashiach campaign, and this would go on for the next 11 months. It goes on till the day, Ad Yom Hazeh. And the Rebbe spoke Yemelt. It was that year, Rosh Hashanah was Pesach was Shabbos. So the first Sfira, and by the way, we started this Farbrengn at 9 o'clock. I haven't davened Maidiv. It's a whole shaila. Can make a Farbrengen before Maidiv. Don't forget to daven Maidiv and don't forget to count Sfira. Right? You have to itkere adodi. The only heter for making a Farbrengen before Maidiv at this time is because we're sitting with so many people. Although I'm sitting looking at a machine, and you have to remind each other we should daven Maidiv and count Sfira. So that year, the first Sfira was on Sunday. In other words, Shavuos was on a Sunday. So it was Tmimes, Kesidran, right? Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Shabbos was a week. Chesed, Yevura, Teferes, and so on. So Tazriya Mitzvah was Shabbos, so it was Malchus Shabbat Teferes. It was the end of the third cycle, third week of Sfiras Eimer, and it was Malchus Shabbat Teferes. So the Rebbe said, Eizu derech shavalei adam kol shi Teferes. He quoted the Mishnah Pirkei Avos. That was the second Shabbos after Pesach. The first Shabbos after Pesach was Shmini, which we learned the first Perek in Pirkei Avos. The second Shabbos after Pesach was the Tazriya Mitzvah. We learned the second Perek in Pirkei Avos. And he started the Farbrengen with Rabbi Yoimer. That's how he started the Farbrengen, if I'm not mistaken. Rabbi Yoimer, Rabbi says, Eizi derech yisharash yavel. What is the pathway which is yasha for a person to choose? Kol shi Teferes. And he stopped right there. What is Teferes? Teferes is Teda. That same day was the sphere of Malchus Shabbat Teferes. So the Rebbe said, what is the meaning of Malchus Shabbat Teferes? The Torah connected to Malchus. Torah has many sugyas, and the Rambam finishes the whole Sefer Mishnah Torah with Hilchas Malachim and Malcham Melech HaMashiach, Hilchas Melech. So Kol Shi Teferes, the Rebbe Getaish, the Rebbe interpreted the Torah of Mashiach. And the Rebbe then spoke about the idea of learning in Yoni Mashiach or Geula, or learning in Yoni Geula Mashiach. Now, I want to say something now, which I should have said earlier, when I spoke about the miracles. In that Sikha, I think in that Sikha the Rebbe says, Im Siyuma Shel Chedesh Nisan Shnas Hei Tavshin Nun Aleph, it's Kol Kithim. The Rebbe sort of gave a ketz. If I'm not mistaken, in the beginning of the Sikha Tazriya Mitzvah, which is Muga, the Rebbe sort of said at the end of Nisan, 33 years ago, is a ketz. It's like the end of the normal Kol Kithim, the end of all the kitzim. But at the very beginning of that Farbrengen, the Rebbe made a point, which ties into the miracles I spoke about before, that I mentioned before. And that is that there's Arenu Neflois and Neflois Arenu, right? The Rebbe gave abbreviations for each year. So Tov Shin Nun Aleph was the Hey Shnas Neflois Arenu. Of course, we reversed it, Arenu Neflois, but technically it's Hoya the Hey Shnas Neflois Arenu. Wonders that the Eibush shows us. But in the Pasuk it says, Ki Beiseichem Et Messiah Arenu Neflois, the word Arenu before the word Neflois. And the Rebbe spoke to this. What's the difference between Neflois Arenu, wonders that I show you, and Arenu Neflois means I show you wonders. And the Rebbe said an interesting point. He said, there's different levels of miracles. There's a level of a miracle that if the Eibush doesn't show it to you, you don't see it. And then there's a level of miracle which is so overt, it's so overwhelming, and so in your face that you can see it with your eyes closed. Neflois Arenu Nun Aleph, the Rebbe said, is a miracle that someone has to show you. Like the miracles of the Gulf that we celebrate because the Rebbe pointed them out. We're seeing miracles of a much greater level. And we're not celebrating them because the Rebbe is not pointing. He is pointing them out. We just don't hear him. And the Rebbe said the miracles of Mashiach itself are going to be so transcendent, so overwhelming that you're going to see them. The Rebbe said the Eibush himself is going to show them to you. No one's going to have to point them out. They're going to be self-evident. That's the meaning. The Flois Arenu means miracles that need to be pointed out. And then in the Flois means miracles which are self-shown. They're so profound. They're so transcendent, so beyond nature, you can't not see them. Anyway, but in that Farbrengn, the Rebbe spoke about Lord Mashiach Agula, which is interesting. Because the Rebbe, as we know, his whole mitzvah is like HaMedesh Yikel HaMaisa, everything is action. Maisa b'pel, do a mitzvah, put on tefillin, put up a mezuzah, give a penny to tzedakah. Everything is a maisa. And there's a lot of his bonus. You could think about this sheet of the Rebbe, of being so action-focused, action-based, action-centric. It really makes sense if you think about our generation and our time and people moving from one place to another, people actually changing. But education, in other words, to sit and study something before you do something about it wasn't in the Rebbe's habit. You just do it. When it came to Mashiach, you got to learn. You have to learn. The Rebbe said, learning about Mashiach brings Mashiach. Learning about Mashiach brings Mashiach. It's reminiscent, although I don't know if the Rebbe made the connection, to the famous medrash about learning about Beis HaBchira, that when you learn about the third Beis HaMikdash, you're not just learning because Kol Ha'esik Potatoes Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Kilabana Beis HaMikdash, but it is Binyan Beisi. Lo Yehei Binyan Beisi Charav. Learning about building the Beis HaMikdash is building the Beis HaMikdash. And learning about Mashiach is bringing Mashiach. To learn, you don't have to learn about Mashiach and try and understand. And there's, of course, a lot of levels and dimensions to this I want to throw in now. That I remember at the time, Rabbi Chaim Gutnik, Alav HaShalom, traveled around the world with Rabbi Yitzchak David Harav, Yitzchak David Groner, Aleim HaShalom, Zechenam Levracha, to talk about Mashiach. And one of the places they visited was a house, you may have heard of it. It's called 770 Eastern Parkway. And they spoke. They traveled all over the world. And they came to Crown Heights as well. They spoke in 770. Rabbi Gutnik spoke about this idea that the Rebbe said that you bring Mashiach by learning in Mashiach Agula. So the Rebbe told the story in this. Rabbi Gutnik told the story in Tanakh with Elisha, which we had recently in the Haftarah, where Naaman, who was the Tzava Aram, he was the chief of staff of the king of Aram, was a mitzvah. He was a leper. And he couldn't be cured. And the king of Yisrael said to the king of Aram, we have Ish Elokim, we have men of God, we have a prophet. You should come to the Ish Elokim and he'll cure him. So at first he didn't want to go, and then he finally went, and Elisha wouldn't even see him. He sent out his secretary and said, tell him he should tevel in the Yarden. He should immerse himself in the waters of the trickle of a river called the Jordan. And he was so insulted. He was insulted by the fact that the Navi wouldn't meet him. He was insulted by the fact that he gave him such putrid advice. He said, I have in Damascus the best bathhouses in the world. I got a tevel in the muddy Yarden. He was really upset. And somebody said, I want to ask you a question. If he told you to climb the Eiffel Tower, you would think, maybe some kind of, I'll work very hard, I'll do something extraordinary, something is going to happen. Yeah? He gave you a simple piece of advice. He gave you an instruction which is so easy for you to do. So because it's easy, you're going to decide that it doesn't mean it. Because it's easy, you're going to decide that it's not going to work. Try! So he went, and he traveled in the Yarden, and he was cured from his leprosy. And there's a whole Hemshech Hasibur. The story continues, but not important for right now. So Rabbi Gutik made the point. The Rebbe told us to learn about Mashiach HaGula. So we say, yeah, really? That's going to be Mashiach? Yeah. How? It's not our business. Just like the Sar Tzova Aram, it was ill. And he tavels in the yard and he's cured. How did that work? It's not our business. That's what the Navi said. And the same is true in our case. The Rebbe spoke with Mashiach HaGula. This is the first point. But there's a deeper point. And the deep point is important. And the important point is, Mashiach is something you need to understand. Because if you don't understand it, you don't even know what you want. And if you don't know what you want, you can't really want it. I am disturbed. I'm going to now offend you. I'm sorry, some of you at least, by the fantastic idea of Mashiach. You know, all the people who passed away are going to come back, which is really connected to Tchias HaMesim. It's not connected to Mashiach. Does it happen right away? It depends who. But everyone thinks of Mashiach as this supernatural world. Whether Mashiach is connected to miracles or not, and according to the Rambam, the way it's written in Mishnah Torah, it isn't. But the Ravid argues, and the other Rishonim argue. Chassidus seems to be inclined in the other direction. The Rebbe holds that all these things can happen at one time. Even if Mashiach's coming as do with miracles, Mashiach is not about miracles. That's not what he's about. And, you say, Mashiach will come, this miracle will happen. You say, well, I can do without the miracle. But you see, if you understood what Mashiach is, you would understand why you need him. And in order to know what Mashiach is, so you can understand why you need him, you have to learn, you have to be educated. And I marvel, I can't believe after all of these years, the way we teach the children about Mashiach. And we teach ourselves about Mashiach. It's all about the fantasy about Mashiach, about, forgive me for using this expression, the Disneyland version of Mashiach. And the teeth of Mashiach, the meat and potatoes of Mashiach, the religion of Mashiach, which actually makes Mashiach not just realistic, but necessary, which will then create in us a desire for Mashiach. And the desiring Mashiach is what's going to bring Mashiach, is lost. What is Mashiach? So let's talk. The Rebbe has enough sichas. And Hilchas Malachim and Mechamas Melech HaMashiach, Perik Rav, and Rebbe has a commentary on every word. I actually once wrote a whole book. I put together a whole book of the Rebbe sichas on that subject. I never published it, but it's sitting on my computer. Other people have since published that kind of a sefer, compiling all the Rebbe sichas on the Seder of the Halachas and Ram, Hilchas Malachim, Perik Rav, Perik Rebbe, line by line. The first thing you have to know about Mashiach is that he's a melech, he's a king. Why is that important? Because a king is a matter of Jewish law. King is not a fantasy. It's not a miracle. It's a part of religion. There's 630 mitzvahs. Several of those mitzvahs, we had them not long ago in Chitas. Pesach time, we always learn same Tas Malach HaMelech, right? The Tanya from Friday. The end of Perek, Membeis. Was same Tas Malach HaMelech. It's a mitzvah, say de'iraisa, to have a king and to accept you have to accept him as your king and develop in yourself a fear and a respect for that king. It's a mitzvah, say de'iraisa. It's a mitzvah. Melech is one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. What's the king's job? Number one, to make Jewish people safe. And number two, to strengthen Yiddishkeit. That's his job. A king is a human being whose role it is to protect the Jewish people and to encourage people to follow Das HaEmes, Mishpat V'Tzedek, and so on. This is not unique to Mashiach. This is unique to every melech. As the Rambam points out, David HaMelech is called Mashiach Rishon. And Mashiach Tzidkeinu is Melech HaMashiach, Yamid Ba'acharoina. Every king, certainly Malchei Yisrael from Shevet Yehuda, who are Nimshachu, are Mashiach. They're a Melech. And all kings have the same job. To protect the Jewish people, to make it so safe. Hashem eniach lei mikol levav misaviv, right? Limnis le'melech, lahachar zarei shalamolik, which is a representation of making the Jewish people safe, and then livnis beis habchira, which is to make Yidden from Erlich, Jewish, good, righteous, good and kind. And this is the job of a melech. So if every king is doing this, and Mashiach is doing the same job as any other melech, so what makes Mashiach so special? If every melech Yisrael HaKosher had the same role, because it's a law in the laws of kings that define what's the role of a melech, And Mashiach just does the same as all the rest of them. So what makes Mashiach distinctive? And there's a one-word answer. And the one-word answer is Matzliach. Is that he sees it through, that he succeeds. It's not a different job. It's just a different measure of success. Melech HaMashiach is Melech HaMashiach not because he's doing something no one's ever done before. It's because he finishes what he starts. He teaches Yidden first through coercion and then through education and Goyim. Of course, the first thing about Melech HaMashiach is himself. His own personal avodas Hashem. That he's a pashta from a Yid. And then he's Yaakov Kol Yisrael, Leilach B'Alachazik Bitka. And then he's Mulcham Milchamas Hashem. And then he's Beinei Beis Mikdash B'Mem Keimeh. He's Makabes Nitchei Yisrael. There's a whole series of steps that Mashiach needs to do. And they're all about religion, his own personal religious life, and then his influence on the Jewish people, that they should be Erlich and Frum. And then Lahav will have an influence on Goyim as well. In other words, Mashiach is, from the perspective of Jewish law, perspective of Rambam, from the Rebbe Siches, about Yiddishkeit. Now, some of you are going to be disappointed with this because you like pizza, you like retirement, you like all the things that the Mishnah says at the end of Masechta Seita. And if Mashiach means another vacation, that's a good idea. If Mashiach means another Blat Gemara, I say, whoa, I didn't sign on for that. You need to appreciate something. And this is the spirit of all the Rebbe Sichas and Mashiach, beginning with Balak in Chelik Yitres. And that's the following. And I'll frame it to you in plain words. I'll frame it for you in Oisis Pshutes. Does this world belong to God or not? Is this Hashem's world or not? Is Hashem the creator of this world? Is Hashem the master of this world? Yes or no? Good question, right? And of course, absolutely in the affirmative. Yes, certainly, He's the creator of the world. And in Chassidus it says He creates the world every single second. And He's the master of the world. So then comes another question. Why doesn't it look that way? Why is Rishayim Gevrim Bey and Rubim Kulira, Rak Ma'at Teiv Moda Besecha? Because it's the world of Klipis. If it's the Eibishter's world, why does it look at the Eibishter's world? It's a really legitimate question. Many years ago, I once heard a program where they were talking about proof for God. Some atheist called up and said, I'll believe in God. Let Him reveal Himself. And you know what? It was a good time there. It's a good point. What's the game of cat and mouse that Eibishter plays? But that's what Mashiach is. Mashiach simply means that if you look at the behavior of human beings, not the miracles of nature, look at the behavior of human beings, you will see that the Eibishter is their master. He tells them what to do, and they accept what He tells them, and not as a king who forces people to do things, but like the Rebbe spoke in the Sichas, like the Rav, like a teacher who inspires. The Rebbe has a Sicha in Chelik Lamed, I think it is, Vayigash, where the Rebbe quotes the Psukim, and it's special. It's a different kind of Sicha. It's not consistent with the Derech Mitzvah. It's a different approach, where the Rebbe says that Mashiach as a Melech is not forever. But Mashiach as a Rav, as a teacher, is forever. And he explains, because a king forces people to do things that they don't want to. The teacher educates. And the Rebbe suggests that the need for coercion, Mashiach getting us to do the right thing, beginning with the Jewish people, Yaakov Kol Yisrael, Leilech Bo Lachadik Bitka, is only the beginning. Ultimately, Mashiach becomes a teacher. And as a teacher, you don't have to force. If people are listening and learning and interested in what you have to say, they'll do the right thing, not because you threaten them. You force them because they understand. Now, the truth is, people don't do the right thing because they understand. They do the right thing because the Eibishter said. And the Eibishter looking over their shoulder. But the idea of Mashiach is that the relationship between the Eibishter and the world is such that people are in a position to learn and understand and do what the Eibishter says to be human beings. We were created in the image of God. Every human being was created with Tselem Elokim, in the countenance of God Almighty. And that's a schus. And that's not Jewish people. It's human beings, like the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos. Chaviv Adam, Shem Chaviv in Yisrael. It's two different things. and created in the image of God makes us distinct. There's no other creation which comes near how special a human being is, both in terms of his chosim, his merits, his rights, and his obligation. And a human being has to not be macharev the tzelem alakim. A human being is not allowed to violate and desecrate and darken the tzelem alakim shalpanav, the countenance of Hashem. In other words, you have to live in a life where you look at a human being, you see God. He created us in his image. It should look that way. And on a human level, that everything begins with our mind, not with our heart. We don't do things impulsively. We think, we judge, we discriminate. We don't think and judge and discriminate based on our ego. We judge and discriminate and measure based on our humility, based on our understanding that we're in the image of God. And we look for the truth, and we look for righteousness, and we do it. That's all Mashiach is. Everything that we know we should do, we do. Mergonisht. That's the chiddush. The novelty of Mashiach is his ability to get us to listen. Not just the Jewish people, but the nation at large. And that's all a part of the idea that you have to learn in Yoni Mashiach Agul. You have to learn about Mashiach. You have to learn about Mashiach. You have to understand Mashiach. Because if you learn about Mashiach and you understand Mashiach, you know what you want. Now, you may decide you don't want him, which you'll be afraid to tell your wife or your children or your friends in shul. But you may also think about it for a few days and say, this is far more meaningful. And not only is more important, it's far more important. Mit a nes wenigen, one miracle more, one miracle less is one thing. But the idea that Hashem ha'aretz hamloi, this is God's world. And Mashiach means that you see in this world that it's his. Not in how he controls the world, but in how human beings are mitzayes. They follow, they listen to the Eibishter's instructions in his Heilige Torah that he gave Yidden 630 mitzvahs. And Lahadl Goyim Sheva mitzvahs b'nei ne'ech, and all the sniffing like the Rebbe always spoke. Because they want to be righteous. Because they want to be human beings as human beings were designed by the Creator to be. Not just animals who are more intelligent so they can be more destructive and more violent and more abusive of nature and of the world and of the resources and all the other things. But live like the Eibishter wants us to live. That's Mashiach. And the truth of the matter is, the world has never been close to that possibility. Humankind has never been close to the possibility for human beings to say, I want to be good. People talk about the craziness of the world. The world's gone nuts. America's completely out of whack. And it's scary. It's sad. It's the operative word is it's really, really sad. And you know what's sad about it? All of the equivocation, all of the subjectivity, all of the anybody can do whatever, everything they want, and you have to love them and accept them, that whole philosophy. It's not based on permissiveness. It's not based on a desire to rebel against God, like in Mitzrayim, like it says in the Parshas Acharei, or in Canaan. It's based on kindness. Right? America's liberalism is because you don't want one person to suffer. And one person has a certain mental illness. As a result of mental illness, he has a deviation in his thinking and in his feeling and therefore in his actions. And we want him to be comfortable. So you have to break all the rules of the data that this one person should be comfortable. That's the root of it. The root of the loss of a moral center, common sense, middle of the road, derech hamitzvah, which is derech ha'emes, is of kindness. Because American people, and the nation of America is a kind country. I want you to know. This is me talking, so you're going to get my version of the world. In the Farbrengen of Mishpatim, which I mentioned before, the Rebbe talked about America and Russia again and again and again. In the Farbrengn live, which I was present, every time the Rebbe mentioned America, the Rebbe said, Chasidei U'Meselim, righteous Goyim. When the Sikha came out Mugad, the Rebbe changed it to Malchus Shel Chesed, the nation of kindness. But the Rebbe said, Chasidei umes ha'olam, righteous goyim, Chasidei umes ha'olam. So people say, how could the Rebbe say it? Look what's going on. What's happening in our country is people are so desperate to be righteous. And they don't have a God, unfortunately. They threw God in the garbage. They don't have a Bible, unfortunately. They think, anybody could write a Bible. I mean, one of the lessons of the beginning of the 21st century is it's not so easy to write a Bible. Maybe you don't like every word of it. Not everything about it you agree with. But it's not easy to write a Torah, to give rules to all of mankind for all times and all places that are constant and that are binding and that keep us in the space of humanity. We're living in a civilization where, in the name of kindness and in the lack of a connection to ayin reya ve'ezen shemas v'chol ba'asecha b'sefer nechtavim, eye that sees and ear that hears, and everything you do is recorded in a book. And ata, this is what everybody say to goyim, ata osid li tein din v'cheshbon, you will one day have to give a reckoning for your actions. So when you have a lack of that presence, and you want to be a good person, there's no limit. It's like, plish, everything's open. So we've lost our moral compass completely in the desire to be kind. It's uniquely American. It's very sad. And what's the solution? The world is falling to pieces. Teach. A good argument could be made that what's going on in America is pushing a vacuum. It's not a new energy. It's not a new force. It's a lack of an energy. Teach. The Rebbe spoke by the Shavuot Mitzvahs B'nei. And I am not a shliach, and I don't have any authority. Far be it from me. There certainly was in the Rebbe's teaching pulling back on that campaign for whatever reasons. So I don't know how this should be done practically and actionably, but the Rebbe gave us a mitzvah. He quoted the Rambam says that it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation. And a Yid once gave me a whole speech about arvus. You're not mechuyev to have arvus over goyim. If you look at that tzicha, I'm not so sure you could say that you have no chiyuv to find a goy and teach him because of no arvus. The Rebbe said it's a chiyuv gomo to teach goy which have mitzvahs nenech. Teach them about God. Teach them the idea that kindness doesn't mean anybody can do anything. Like the famous mashal that the Rebbe would often bring about a man sitting on a boat and he's drilling a hole under his seat. And when you tell him you're going to drown the soul, he says, it's my seat, I paid for it, on my seat, I can do what I wish. We're all connected. And although you have to worry about the individual very much, but you need to appreciate that the individual is part of a community. And when you approach the rights of the individual in a kind of way that it hurts the civilization at such a deep and a basic level, it's wrong. So how do you continue being kind and appreciate the fact that not every individual can express every belief and every feeling and every deviancy? It's tricky, but there's a balance. And the balance is, there's the Yochid and there's the Rabbi. You should know, if you study the Rebbe Sichas, one of the differences between the mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave Yidden and the mitzvahs that gave humanity, all of humankind, is the mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave Yidden are measured by individual Jews, you and your relationship with God. The mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave to all of humanity are defined by the society. Your actions are determined not by what they are as an individual, how they reflect on the civilization. And if you appreciate how the acts of one affected the civilization and the act of another affected the civilization, you appreciate that as kind as you want to be, there is a center, there is a middle. And it's our job to teach. And I want to say one thing about Shavuot Mitzvah. This is a personal opinion. That's all it is, a personal opinion. If you look at the Shavuot Mitzvah, they're rules. They're not a way of life. Moreover, they're rules everybody knows anyway. So exactly what are you teaching? I don't know this for a fact, but I feel that part of the reason that Rebbe was not happy with how Shavuot Mitzvah was being taught is because we're teaching Shavuot Mitzvah as rules. You can't teach Shavuot Mitzvah as rules. You have to teach Shavuot Mitzvah as a way of life, as a lifestyle. And I'll tell you what that lifestyle is. That lifestyle comes down to a very simple principle. This is just me speaking here. Im kesef talves ami es ani imoch ani yircha kaidme. The Eibishter gave a Torah to all of mankind. At the base of that Torah is chesed, is kindness, with a simple rule. The first person you need to be kind to is the person closest to you. That means your spouse. The second person you need to be kind to is the person second closest to you, which means your children. The third person you need to be kind to is the fourth closest person to you, which means your parents. The fourth person you need to be kind to is your siblings, and you radiate outward. Now, why do you think that is? Why did the Eibishter say that charity begins at home? It sounds so selfish. It's much better to give charity to a stranger than to give charity to your wife, to your husband. You know what the answer to that question is? Because it's very easy to give charity to a stranger. Because when you give $1 to a stranger, you gave him $1. But if you're having a fight with your husband, you're having a fight with your wife, and Torah says be kind to the person closest to you, you're not giving them $1. You're giving a piece of your will, a piece of your soul, and it's giving you midas toives. It makes you a better person. The Sheva Mitzvahs are a way of life that don't only teach us kindness, they teach us kindness in the kind of way, like the Rambam says, the Lashon, that they give us midas toives, and they give us deyes nechenes. First of all, they improve our character because it's hard. The hardest person to be kind to is the person closest to you. It's a fact of life. The second hardest person to be kind to, the second person closest to you, and so on. And then, of course, from the midas tevish, from developing character, from being kind to someone you don't want to be kind to, because God said you have to be kind to your wife or to your husband, and to your children, or to your parents, and to your siblings, is deyes. You start to think with your mind about values, to use a cliche, above your heart, with an openness and with a refinement that allows you to understand values that are not just about the pursuit of pleasure and the fulfillment of desires. It makes you a better person. That's the spirit of the Sheva Mitzvahs. It's the spirit of the Sheva Mitzvahs. And it's Mashiach's coming has to do with the world becoming better. And part of the world becoming better is us understanding and us teaching, explaining to people what a human being is, explaining to people what God means, explaining to human beings what it means to be created in the image of God, explaining to human beings what the Rebbe spoke when he spoke about Sheva Mitzvahs, that you have to give an account to your Maker of the extent to which you preserved or you violated your image of God, your Tzelem Elokim. It's an obligation upon all of us. It's a realistic thing. It's complicated and dynamic. And if you think about it on a global level, it's overwhelming. I just want to say one thing, and I'm going to finish with this, okay? Adin Even Yisrael, all of Hashem, Zechenu Livracha. Adin Even Yisrael, right? I'm not going to say Tut Altz. Wrote a book which is called My Rebbe. Adin Even Yisrael, as we know, was a very big chassid. But he was also a giant of a human being. He was a gadol. He was a giant of a human being. Literally. A gadol amiti. A giant of a human being. And he wrote a book called My Rebbe. The second chapter of his book is Mashiach. Not the last. Everybody talks about Mashiach, they put Mashiach at the end of the story, like the Rambam does. You talk about all the practical things, and you have one of the signs that the drasha is over, that you say, the Rabbi used to joke about that. The beginning of his book is about Mashiach. You know why? Because Adin Even Yisrael was so smart and had such a deep understanding of the Rebbe, and a deep understanding of the capacity of Echad Yila Elif, Shnayim Yila Revava, that he saw the Rebbe's desire to change the world as practical. It's not kind of magic. You start with one and another and another and another, and it adds up. It accumulates. Like that famous story of this rabbi who came from South Africa to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him that he should do more rabbonis and more business. So he said to the Rebbe, I appreciate the fact that you think so highly of me, but I'm not capable of doing everything that you're telling me to do. And the Rebbe told him the following words: your mistake is you think of an act of kiruv like a chemical reaction. You take a chemical which is stable, take another element which is stable, and you put them together and they react. And the reaction releases energy, whatever it is. It makes a change and then it becomes stable again. It's not a chemical reaction, it's a nuclear reaction. It has ripples and ripples and ripples and ripples ad infinitum. And Adin Evan Yisrael makes it very clear that he sees the Rebbe's vision of Mashiach as an actionable and a practical thing. It's one foot in front of the other. So the Eibishter Zalman help us first of all, say l'chaim again as I close this Farbrengn. And I hope I lifted your spirits and didn't drag them down, because there'd be no point in dragging people's spirits down. That's aufheben. If I'm simcha b'tach in the Eibishter, we have to thank Hashem for all the miracles and ask for more miracles. And we should have Teva Nidav and Nigle, sein ruhig ba'alamin, in the ganze Welt, when it's Yisrael, bepel mamish. So l'chaim to all of us, we should live active Hasidic lives. It begins with a good attitude, with betochen, with simcha, with chayas, and with Torah and avoid and gemilas chasodim. And we should do our part. Everybody has their part. And we should take from a yad that is Galz Melech HaMashiach. We should gezend mit Nereben. Wees doch, ja, mit Melech, mit Beis David, the Heye Betere. Ve'esig b'mitzvahs. V'terish b'tash b'pech v'dav, v'terish b'tash b'pech. V'Yakov kol Yisrael, leilech bo, u'lechazik bit, v'yilchem v'chames Hashem b'yinatzeach. V'yivne Beis HaMikdash b'im koimei. V'yikah Beis Chesol. You know, the sikha that they gave out, Teres Menachem Lahak gives out sikhas every Shabbos. They gave out the Farbrengen of Yiralf Nissen. And the Rebbe said, Yivne Beis HaMikdash is not yet Mashiach. Mashiach's coming is not represented by Beis HaMikdash. Mashiach's coming is represented by Kibbutz Goliath, which happens after Beis HaMikdash. L'chaim zom al zecha sein taken from a yad, sein freilach, and we sollen schlafen. L'chaim. A gute Nacht. L'chaim. Don't forget to make a bracha achrena, and don't forget to have a meirev and kansvir.